Welcome to Secrets from the Scene, a show for local musicians who want to improve their music, grow their audience, and learn about Minnesota's music scene. If you're interested in talking about all things music related and meeting interesting people from our local community, you're in the right place. Welcome to Secrets from the Scene. My name is Stephen Helvig, and I'm your host. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. This podcast is all about the Minnesota music scene. We've got artists, producers, industry folk, venues, you name it, and everybody comes on and shares their background, their journey, their lessons, and their secrets. If you're a longtime listener, thank you so much for your support. You keep the podcast going. Everybody, please take a second to just subscribe if you haven't yet, or hit like, leave a comment. That sort of stuff really helps. Today's episode is going to be fun. I've looked forward to this. Our guest is behind one of the more legendary studios, not only in our state, but in the Midwest, to be certain. And we've never met before. So I'm really excited to get to know Nick better and to learn a lot from him. I think there's a lot that we all can learn, given his decades of experience in the music industry. Nick is an engineer, producer, and the man behind Pachyderm Studios in Cannon Falls. Now, I think a lot of people that are listening to this probably know of Pachyderm, but if you haven't ever heard of this studio is quite legendary in a lot of senses, and it's definitely one of the more vibe-heavy places to record in the entire state. Nick has worked with acts like Trampled by Turtles, Jayhawks, Hippo Campus, I think Beach House, and I'm sure that list goes on for a while, as well as a bunch of legendary other producers. And today, what we're going to do is not only talk about Pachyderm and the history of Pachyderm and Nick's background and his portfolio, but we're also going to talk about just some basic kind of do's and don'ts for studio preparation, for studio etiquette, and also kind of compare and contrast some of the ways that studio culture has changed over the years, things that remain the same, but the things that are quite different given how much the industry and the tech has changed over the years. And I'm sure a lot more. I'm really excited to get into it. Please welcome today's guest, Nick Tveitbakk.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, man. I'm so happy to meet you. I've known your name and work and local stuff for a long time. And so it's just cool. That's one of my favorite things about having started this podcast is I've been kind of a recluse, as a lot of engineers are at times.
Yeah.
Just doing my thing in my little studio, and not actually getting out and meeting people that I would love to meet. And so this is cool. I appreciate you making time, and I can't wait to learn more about you and, of course, about Pachyderm.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love the podcast.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Let's start with a background on you before we get to the studio. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and when you wanted to become an engineer.
Well, I grew up in northwestern Minnesota.
Whereabouts?
Thief River Falls.
Okay.
It's an hour from Canada and 45 minutes from North Dakota. It's the big city up there. It's, I think, grown to about 10,000 people now. Growing up, it was 8. And my dad's family immigrated from Norway to that area in 1907. My dad's family is a musical family. So my great-grandfather, I think he was 30 when he immigrated, but he was a Hardanger fiddle player. Wow. And he actually came from an area called Valla, and he's in the Hardanger Fiddle Museum and Hall of Fame.
Have you been over to the homeland?
I'm one of the only people in my family that hasn't. Okay. I'm trying to go this summer. But yeah, so growing up, there was always music in the house. I never met Bjorn, my great-grandfather, but my grandfather, Louis, his third son, was even more musical than his father. He could play like anything, and he had perfect pitch, and he would tune our piano as kids, with his ears and like a little guitar tuner. But we were always doing music. My parents put all of us in piano lessons in like the first grade. My dad was in rock bands in the 70s, and so we were always kind of looking up to him, my brothers and I. Both my older brother and I were in high school bands, and my dad would come out and do sound for us. And my dad's an electrician. Through that and him kind of showing us how to set up PAs, and all the shows in Thief River are DIY. If you go to a bar, which we did in high school to play, you had to bring your own PA. So you had to know how to plug it in, how to make, the kick drum sound good. And that's kind of how I got into the engineering of things, and really by watching my dad do it. And then also just playing instruments. My grandfather was every weekend out at little town halls jamming with his friends, and they would just have maybe a half dozen to a dozen people with drums and guitars and playing folk music. Mm-hmm. And he would give us as kids, like, here's some music, like, you're going to play with us. And I remember so many times, like, I played trumpet in band. He would give me music that wasn't trumpet music, and he would just be like, you got to figure out, transpose this. And I was, a kid. I didn't know what transpose even meant. But on the fly, he taught us how to do all that stuff. So yeah, just kind of growing up in a family that loved music, and my parents really emphasized the importance of, learning piano and being in band and being in choir. And through playing in high school bands and doing our own sound and setting up our own PAs, I got into engineering. Also had a really great choir director growing up that was really inspirational. Darcy Reese, who retired this year. She was just so good at teaching, and I still use everything she taught me today, like when I'm coaching people on vocals and things like that. Yeah. So musically, growing up, really good experience, and went to music tech right out of high school. I just left Thief River and went summer semester to music tech, which then became McNally Smith, and then later became the Hewing Hotel. And then from there, kind of started interning at studios. The first studio I interned at was Oarfin Records, which is right next to, or was right next to that hotel and across the street from the Monte Carlo. And that was, I think, 2000. I went to music tech for 3 semesters and got a job as an assistant engineer. Chopper Black, who I love to death, told me like I should leave school. So one of my professors was like, "Get out of school. You have a job."
Wow, yeah.
So yeah, I started working at Oarfin as an assistant or as an intern, answering phones, cleaning bathrooms, and then became an assistant, which was 2 shifts at Oarfin. It was a commercial studio, so it was 10 to 5 and 5 to midnight, and I would have to work both. 2 separate engineers. Kind of worked my way up to engineer at that place, and then I think financial crisis, like 9/11, things really crashed. And so they were cutting budgets and things like that. And we weren't as busy as we used to be. And they were talking about putting me on an hourly salary. And a friend of mine who was on the record label, he's in a band called Flip. Bryn Ahrens, the singer of Flip.
Okay.
He knew I was kind of getting pushed aside a little bit because of budgets. And he introduced me to one of my best friends ever, John Kuker. And I left Oarfin to go work for John, and I basically still work for John and his family. And I was 20 years old when I started working with John.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, first of all. That's a great overview. And it, in some ways, especially the beginning of the story, there's some interesting parallels between yours and mine in that also grew up in a very, very, very far away from the Twin Cities, but the extreme south end of the state.
Okay.
Right on the border of Iowa, basically. Tiny little town. The nearest big town would be like Fairmont, roughly the same size, but no musical family, but also Norwegian roots and, all of that sort of same thing. I want to hear a little bit actually about Oarfin.
Yeah.
Because it was just before I really got out of college. Like, that was all gone by the time I was kind of getting into the scene. And so I always just kind of hear about it once in a while from people that have history there, but I don't know a lot about it. So it was a studio and a record label?
Yeah, it was kind of a one-stop shop. Amazing place. It used to be, before it was Oarfin, it was Metro. And I believe Tom Tucker started it. Johnny Lang did Lie to Me there.
Okay.
And there was other records done there. It was like an 80s room. So it was very dead and wood.
Okay.
It was beautiful, like wood room. But it was kind of in that Minneapolis era, I think in the 80s and 90s, where there was just so many big commercial studios and there was so much work to go around. And I think when it was started, there was like session players. Because I remember we would do an artist and the old Metro session players would come in and they all had jackets with their names on it and like the instrument they played. And that was kind of that world, right? Like everyone, there was like a bass player that was on a salary at the studio and he would play bass in sessions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so different now.
It is.
But Oarfin did all of the above. They were a record label, they were distribution, they were promotion. I know Krista Valinskis, she was working there when I started and then later moved on to like kind of start her own companies and things like that. And Krista's still doing it to this day. But yeah, it was a one-stop shop. If you were a band, you could come in, you could record a record. You could then have someone promote your record. You could have someone do college radio for your record. I remember Oarfin, you know, they were in Best Buy and Electric Fetus, and it was kind of all of the above, which was really cool.
Did the whole thing, all the divisions of it, end kind of at the same time? Or did like a studio hang on for a while, but the record side stop? How did that work?
I think like as things changed, and a lot of it again is to do with just the economy crashing and Napster and that whole world coming up, you know, it changed everything.
Yeah.
So the promotion side left, and I think Krista just decided to start her own company and do it her own way. And so that was the first to kind of drop off. Then I think the studio was next, but I wasn't there when it closed up. But the distribution side, that kept, and the label kept going, and it might still be going to this day. I don't really know for sure. But that was the last thing to go. But also that is the one that has a business model that actually makes the most sense and might be the easiest to, you know, generate some sort of income.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was, you said, across the street from Monte Carlo?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it was actually in that area, there's Master Mix and Burr Holland, which later became Oarfin Studio B. You know, there was, and in that old colonial building, which is very different nowadays. I know Venus from All the Pretty Horses had a space. There's probably like 9 studios in that little block, and none of them were related. None of them really worked together. Like the Master Mix crew, we were a little tighter just because Tom had history at Oarfin, and you know, I knew James Harley. He's from Warroad, Minnesota, actually. Oh, and so we were a little more tight, but there was such a concentration of rooms there. And Music Tech had, you know, like 4 or 5 rooms, which later became IPR. So it's kind of weird, like to think about a dozen recording studios within a block of each other, all unrelated and working, where now like everything's so spread out, and it's not like that at all.
Okay. To clarify one thing, Music Tech was the precursor to IPR.
Music Tech was the precursor to McNally Smith, and IPR started when McNally Smith moved to St. Paul, I believe.
Okay, but the location then, so
they just took over the old location and started IPR.
So IPR started in a location that was Music Tech.
Yes.
Music Tech turned into McNally, but moved.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
So you're at Music Tech for a little while. You get that job. You work your way up, kind of traditional, right? Start as an intern, slowly get into the engineering role. And then you meet John. Tell us about John. Who is this guy?
When I met John, I was very much in this, not to say that Oarfin was like corporate, but it was a structured, you know, like protocol, old school kind of way. And I'm really grateful I got to experience that because it still informs the things I do today. And John is very much like that as well, but he also has like a very musical and vibe side to things. I remember starting at Oarfin, they were, you know, the chief engineer at the time, Todd Fitzgerald, who I still know, and he's a great dude.
Yeah, shout out to Todd.
And he wasn't wrong, but he was like, you can't, I was in a band at the time, and he's like, you can't be in a band because you really need to focus on learning how to engineer. And he was absolutely 100% right. And then when I went to go work for John, he was like, dude, you got to be in like 4 bands because like playing music is what this is all about. And he was very much like in that, you know, more into the scene and the vibe of things. And through that, you can generate work and make good records and make good art. And
both things are true.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I really like working for John and just getting to know him. So to describe John compared to Oarfin, like it was like, we'll say Oarfin's like a dentist's office, right? Okay. And John is like Andy Warhol.
Okay. Sure.
And it was just like, what is this place? What is going on here? And it was very quickly that I got into his kind of mode of working, and vibe is everything.
When you met him, he owned a studio at the time?
Yeah. So circling back, John ran Seedy Underbelly, which was 1023 Washington. That building's still there. It's an Indian restaurant now. But he ran Seedy Underbelly in Minneapolis, right next to Bob and Steve's on Washington Avenue. The first record I think he did was Feeling Strangely Fine in a studio.
Which, for anybody that doesn't know, is Semisonic.
Yeah.
Huge record.
Huge record. But his studio was filled. That was another thing about John. Like, Oarfin is very much like, we need these mics, these things, and we have a budget, so we can have 148 and we can have one of these. And John was like, I went to Europe and I found 10 U47s under someone's bed and like brought them all back, and we're going to try them all out and see, he just had so much gear. And it wasn't that he had, infinite amounts of money to buy gear. He just knew like how to go find it. He would call it like microphone safari, and he was or a guitar safari. You would go to Europe or to the South and you would find these things, and he knew what to look for. And he just had like amazing golden ears. Like, he knew the difference between 5 Les Pauls and which one was the best sounding one and things like that. And I don't want to call it like religious, but it was very much like, it wasn't like a 9-to-5 punch-in job anymore. It was like, this is like your life, but it's not, I'm not going to like constrain you into like making you do these things. We're going to do this because we love like exploring all of this stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it was just such a contrast from the previous place I worked at. If anything, it took me like a few months to like get on board. I was like so into like, we got to keep the studio like clean and prepped and ready. And he's just like, whatever. Like, let's just go out and like make cool stuff. Let's go make music. And check out this microphone. Let's record all the U47s on a CDR and listen to them in our car and see which one we like the best. And like all these weird things. We're always doing stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fun. Okay, so you get over to Seedy Underbelly. Mm-hmm. What was the staff like at that time?
It was just John. There was a couple of like interns, assistants that were kind of around, but it was mainly just John and I.
Oh, okay.
I think I kind of came in at the right time. I think that like the person who brought me in knew that it was kind of like, there's an opening here where I think you could really like fill in the space.
Got it. And how long were you then working at that studio?
I worked for John at Seedy Underbelly for 3 years, and then the building was bought.
So this is around 2004, 2005?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
John had built an amazing, beautiful studio in this space, and in his lease, he had first right of refusal to buy the building. He had done everything right, but the landlord was not honoring his lease. And for a year, he fought it in court and lost and moved his studio to Los Angeles, to a house in Valley Village that used to be Jeff Porcaro's house from Toto.
Wow.
And Jeff was the highest paid session drummer of all time when he was alive. And when he had a family, he turned his pool house into a studio. So he didn't have to travel to Germany to do drums. They would ship him 2-inch tapes. He would play on the songs, and they would ship the tapes back to Germany or wherever. Yeah. And he could just stay home with his family.
Yeah.
And so John moved into that studio. He had asked me to move to Los Angeles, and I just wasn't quite ready to do that. And so there was a period where probably 6 months to a year where they were out there. I helped him decommission the studio, load everything up. And then the person that he had hired to kind of take my place didn't work out. And so I just kind of started going out there and working for him again. And in that time, I had started another studio in between doing Seedy Underbelly sessions in Los Angeles called the Sound Gallery.
Yes.
And the Sound Gallery was Flip's rehearsal space. And when I first moved there, I moved into the control room with my band, and that was our practice space.
Okay.
And I put a Tac Scorpion and a 1-inch Otari machine, 16-track, that I purchased from Bryn Arons from Flip that used to be in the room. He literally moved everything out of the room to his house and then sold it to me, and I moved it right back into the room. And over the years, I would just record a lot of DIY bands in between doing sessions at Seedy. And yeah, I'm trying to think. Nate Nelson from American Cream was one of the bigger, more fun projects I did with a band called Penny Arcade. They might have been called United Snakes then.
Okay.
But it was very DIY. It was like before the sound gallery was painted and looked nice, and like even back maybe at its heyday, it didn't look as nice as I think it did. But I remember recording United Snakes on 1-inch 16-track Otari, and it was like August, and there's no air conditioning.
Yeah.
And we had huge industrial fans, and we're all in boxer shorts sweating. Recording
I did one session at Sound Gallery before it closed.
Yeah.
And it was just, how you're describing it is
very hot.
Yeah.
You're on the top floor of a warehouse.
And also just sort of crazy and messy and it was a vibe, and a lot of room. There's tons of room.
The room sounded great.
It was fun.
Yeah. And so the Sound Gallery was Bryn's studio and rehearsal space, and Flip. And there was other bands that rehearsed there. And then Jacob Gruen and Jeff Markovis and I took over the lease from Eric Brettel, who's the drummer from Flip, Kilo Bale. And that was his stage name. And we did some like touch-ups. We painted it. We made it nicer. We cleaned all that. There was so much like stuff in there from, imagine like 2 decades of practice space. And every time someone moves out, they leave a pedal behind, or guitar cables, or exercise machines, or just weird stuff like underneath all these stages. So Jacob, Jeff, and I cleared it all out and kind of gave it a nice little facelift.
Yeah.
And for a while, it was a really, really good studio. And I just decided to leave and go work for John more full-time when he purchased Pachyderm out of foreclosure.
That brings us to Pachyderm. Yeah. So did you ever go to LA and live there, or were you just flying out when you worked?
I lived there part-time. The LA studio was a residential studio. And so over like a decade, I was out there all the time. And so a band would book the studio, just like Pachyderm's residential, and they would stay in the house. And it was a beautiful property. It was probably like a 2-acre property with a pool and a house and this really cool like Spanish kind of ranch house. And so I would go out there. Like, for example, there's a band called The Cribs that we recorded there. And we were all just holed up in the house together I think they were there for like 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And I spent the end of their record. I did all the overdubs and the mixing parts with their producer, Nick Tveitbakk. And so I would just stay out there. And then other times there was projects where John called it Big Pimpin' Project and Low Pimpin'. And like low budget projects, we would stay at the Travel Lodge in North Hollywood, which wasn't a fun place to stay. And then the high ones, we would get to stay at the house, or we would stay at a nicer hotel. And so I would live out there part-time. But I got to work with so many cool people at that studio. And it was basically the same studio, Seedy Underbelly studio that was on Washington Avenue. We just moved it to California into a different space.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so then John decides to buy Pachyderm out of foreclosure. And this is like 2012. Okay. Let's give people a little bit of backstory on Pachyderm, its history, why it went into foreclosure, just the quick highlights of this place.
So I think Pachyderm was started in 1988 by Jim Nichols, Nelson, I think, and then Eric Olson. I think that's who it is. They were 3 guys in a band from Madison. They were kind of doing DIY recordings, and there was a studio at Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, at the Playboy Club in Wisconsin at Lake Geneva, and it was very swanky 70s, just as you would imagine it.
Sure.
And it had like a Neve in it, and they were it was a residential place, and they were very inspired by this mid-century kind of like 70s vibe, and you could come and you could stay. And so they drew 100-mile circle around, I think, Chicago and Madison and Minneapolis, just to find cool properties. And they were literally kind of at the end of their search. They were kind of giving up. And Wendy Lewis was dating Mark, I think, at the time. And she lived down the street, and she still does, her and Brent Sigmuth, who's like one of the most amazing dudes ever, and like engineer from Pachyderm. She told them, like, what about the old Mensing place? And the Mensing family had built this house in 1963 to retire in. And they just on a whim went there and purchased the property and built the studio. And those three, I think, owned it together up until like maybe the early 90s. And then just Jim Nickel was left until, I want to say, roughly 2004.
Okay.
A lot of really cool records done in the 90s. You know, In Utero is probably the biggest one. Rid of Me, Live Throwing Copper, which I didn't even know like until later. And then now I listen to that record and I'm like, yep, that's the room. And that's what one of the cool things about that room that they built is it's got such a like distinct sound. Like you can hear it on that Hum record and like all these records where the drums are huge. It's just that room. And it was designed by someone from Westlake Audio.
Okay.
And they had built so many studios in the 80s and 90s. And Westlake also built Paisley Park.
Okay.
And Pachyderm was built right after Paisley Park was built.
Oh, wow.
And so it's got the same kind of look and vibe and sound, but designed by a really well-known studio designer. And, you know, so basically all of his ideas that he had learned and things that he had like done over the years, that Pachyderm is kind of the culmination of like all of those things.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And so eventually, I mean, legendary records get made, huge reputation, but it, you know, like a lot of the music industry, you know, big studios suffered into the early 2000s and started closing up. So this one evidently makes it into foreclosure. John buys it. What happened next?
So like 2004, Jim decided to get out of the studio business and he sold it to Matt Mueller, who was the second studio owner. And just as you said, like the industry is just kind of in decline. So it's really hard to own a recording studio unless you're in Los Angeles or New York, and which is why John thrived out there. It just kind of continued to decline. And I ran that place for a couple of years and I realized how hard that it is to keep that place up. And so I think it was just a lot of work for that owner to keep up on. And he went into foreclosure. And one of our old studio clients, Jeff McCusker, who recorded at Seedy Underbelly in downtown Minneapolis, he put on Gear Space, I think it's called now. We'll call it Gear Space. Yeah. That Pachyderm's for sale. And it was a thread. And I think it's still on there. You can find it.
Interesting.
And Dave Grohl is on that thread has some like other fake name. Yeah. And there's people looking at Pachyderm and he texted the listing to John. It was listed for $379,000, 7 acres, beautiful mid-century mansion with a recording studio.
Yeah.
But also that's how bad it was. It was both roofs were leaking and there was trees growing out of the house and just all that upkeep that's so difficult and you just have to constantly be working on it every day.
Yeah.
I mean, every day I go to the studio, I want to record a band, but there's like 3 things that pop up that I need to address immediately. Sure. And I think some of that stuff they just kind of stopped doing. And I understand because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So John bought it out of foreclosure for a very cheap price, but then we spent 2 years remodeling it. Seedy Underbelly was thriving and John had purchased another studio in New York that is still going called the Space Pit. It's in Greenpoint. Our friend Nick Hook runs that studio. But yeah, we just constantly opening up a wall. Oh my gosh, what is that? Oh no, this is like a whole other month that we're going to have to spend on this. And it just kept going and going and going. And contractors would come and they would give up because no one wants to work on a project like that for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's just like any of us. If we were to work on Chinese Democracy or some record like that, some, band that's recording a record for 2 years, all your clients would go away. And so contractors are exactly the same way. They want to come in, they want to remodel a bathroom, and they want to leave. They don't want to re-engineer a whole house or gut a studio down to its bones and then put it all back together. But Andy Schultz, who's a musician, Minneapolis musician, amazing carpenter, and Dale Howie, they were instrumental in remodeling the studio. Like all the painting, all the woodwork, all the detail work, they were in there for a year and they made that studio the way it is now. And then we moved to the house, which took 2 years, and really just started like pulling walls apart and trying to get the bad smells out and learning where the animals had got in and all these things that now I know after living and working in the woods for over a decade. Like it's just a constant battle. You're out in nature,
yeah,
and it's trying to come in.
Well, here, we should do one thing for any listeners that are like, this is the first time hearing about Pachyderm. Give people a little bit of an elevator pitch of the layout of Pachyderm. Just even that there's a studio and there's a separate guest house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Pachyderm sits in this beautiful valley where there's a stream, Pine Creek runs through it, filled with trout, big limestone bluffs. It's kind of the very edge of the driftless region, which is a part of Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota that the glaciers didn't flatten and crush. And so these limestone valleys have been there for like tens of thousands of years. And it's just gorgeous, amazing cedar trees, pine trees, oak trees. And then the Mensing family was like, we're going to put our house here, and we're going to, inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think Herb Bloomberg might have went to Taliesin, I'm not sure. But it's very much like this beautiful mid-century house that looks over this beautiful valley. And then you put a studio there. And so now you have this super vibey, like acreage and woods to walk around in, plus a state-of-the-art studio next door. So I always tell people the elevator pitch is the best thing about Pachyderm is the land that it's sitting on, and whatever that magic is, whether it's because like, you know, there's always been people down there for tens of thousands of years, like we joke about it all the time, or it's just a beautiful place. So it's an inspiring, amazing studio to, you know, whether you're recharging in the house or you're looking out the big windows, you can see the property from everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 hours is spent rehabbing this place, or not 2 hours, 2 years.
I wish.
2 years is spent rehabbing this place. You start doing sessions again. Did John keep all 3 studios open for a time? Okay.
Yeah, so we started doing sessions again, more on a private basis. We had a Helios console in there, which was super cool.
Yeah.
From Island Studio in London. It did Exodus by Bob Marley. It's in the Bob Marley movie. Like, not the actual console, but a recreation of it, which was like super special for me to see. And John wasn't quite sure how commercial he wanted to make Pachyderm. He kind of wanted to like keep it more private and just like LA was more of a private studio. We had 1 or 2 major clients. Nick Tveitbakk, who's a producer, friend, engineer, amazing dude, like so legendary. He was kind of the main client. He just was so busy, he would just book the studio. And John kind of wanted something similar for Pachyderm. But then he decided, you know what, let's open it up. And I think Trampled by Turtles was like kind of our first official, more commercial session. And we had moved the Helios out and moved a different API console in. And now we have another different API console. So all 3 studios are going. Pachyderm's like off to the, you know, races, and we're open and sailing. New York is like very self-contained. Nick Hook was running that place, and he's a producer. Nick Tveitbakk, same thing in LA. It was just kind of like turnkey operations, and where Pachyderm was more of like a commercial space where we would do more of the traditional things. A little over a year into Pachyderm being open and really starting to thrive, John passed away. And it was like we didn't know what to do. And I think his family, one of the first things they said to me, and I've known them since I started working for John, they wanted to keep it going. And they asked me, like, well, how do we keep this going? And I was honestly blown away. It was like a day after he had passed. And they're amazing people, just like John was. And I see where he got all of his generosity and his whole like philosophy on life and just how to treat people. Like, that's how Jim and Pam Deal treat people. And that's how his older brother, Matt Kuker, treats people. And that's why they wanted to continue this thing. It's just kind of getting its legs under it, and then he passed away. And so we continue to operate Pachyderm just for John's legacy and just to kind of keep his memory going.
I love that. And it has, you know, how many years has it been now without John?
2015. So almost, we're coming up on 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was 10 this year.
Okay.
In February. February 2nd.
Incredible. And now, are you the sole staff at Pachyderm?
I am the sole employee. I work for Jim and Pam Deal. And then I have just freelancers, assistants, local people that help me take care of the grounds. When John and I bought the place, we would take care of everything ourselves just because that's what we had always done. And the older I get and the busier I get, I just see how insane that was. So there's like a really great community in Cannon Falls. They help me with, taking care of the house, taking care of the property, handyman jobs, odd jobs, just all kinds of things. But everyone in Cannon Falls is just like so supportive and like they love the place. So it's just nice to have both a crew that kind of does kind of the nuts and bolts of the place, but also just a couple of assistants that know the ins and outs of things and can, I don't need to be there to turn over a session or to set something up. They can just like do it.
Right. Yeah. All this has been great. Let's kind of pivot the conversation now that we've kind of covered background and some of the history and that kind of stuff to what you're up to today. One of the things that we discussed about wanting to kind of get into is sort of studio etiquette and studio culture and how it's changed, because Pachyderm is one of the few big studios that's still here in the state, and that comes from kind of an old school approach. Most studios today are closer to like what we're doing, some sort of home studio, right? Now they come in all different shapes and sizes, but that's sort of how things have pivoted. Whereas Pachyderm still has very much, it's a big commercial studio, beautiful and private still, but incomparable to most people's, little setups that they've got now. I think that that can be intimidating for people, right?
For sure.
So talk to me about what to expect if you book out Pachyderm.
When you book Pachyderm, and this kind of goes back to kind of some of John's background, like the biggest thing I think I've ever learned from John and being a disciple of John Kuker is just disarming people and making them comfortable, because every studio is kind of intimidating.
Sure.
Like, you have a beautiful space here, and I'm sure people walk in here and they're like, whoa, and they see the floors drop out, and that, can just start to make you nervous. And if you're nervous, you're going to play different. I've seen the best singers ever like be nervous and not be able to sing, and then that is like kind of a snowball. And so a big thing at Pachyderm is I really just try to make people comfortable. And that's what John taught me, like probably the biggest lesson. And if someone is comfortable, they're going to perform and they're going to do their best work. And, as you said, like it's kind of an intimidating space, but I feel like once people get comfortable and get over those nerves, they're kind of more open to perceiving kind of some of the things that are kind of flowing around that valley. There's just the nature and the magic and the vibes and things that are just kind of down there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it's just making people comfortable.
Yes. That's such a huge part of...
And continuing to...
Yes.
Always checking in on them and making sure they're okay. And, sometimes you have to push people to do things that is going to make them uncomfortable again, but then you need to like kind of like pull them back and again, it's all John's lessons. There was times where we were in the studio joking around, but this amazing guitar player wasn't quite getting the take, right? It wasn't because he was bad. He just couldn't figure it out. And he would literally say to me like, okay, let's quit joking. Let's just visualize in our head and look at the guy and try to just send a good guitar take to him and things like that. Kind of on that weird level, the spiritual level of things.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you this, because making people feel safe and comfortable and supported and all that stuff is such an important part of the creative process. And in today's sort of recording industry setup, a lot of times the person that's engineering is also the producer, might be the band manager. Like people wear so many hats now.
Absolutely. People
are recording themselves, or if they are going to work with somebody else, that person is often doing more than just engineering. Whereas when you started out, probably, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there was more defined roles of like, this person's the engineer, this person's the producer, and so on. And that person's the intern, and they don't touch anything, and all of that. Now, that still to some extent exists, but far less. Now we do wear all the hats. How has that changed for you personally over the years, from where you started to what you do now at Pachyderm?
I mean, when I started as an intern and even as an assistant, like there was so many times where not so many times, like every time I was in the studio, like you do not talk. Like if you talk, you're gone. You're out of the room. And when I became a tape operator, which is like kind of the next progression, my job wasn't to like hang out with anybody or talk to anybody. I literally sat in the corner like all day and didn't say a word, but I was working and writing things down and marking what time on the tape a chorus is and things like that. And there was old school dudes that if you were on the parquet of the control room floor, like he wanted you to leave like the room because you were crowding him. Like all these really like things that seem so mean to me today.
I know that stuff is crazy in comparison to what it's like today.
But they weren't wrong. I mean, they maybe were going about it in a weird way. And then I feel like today, like some of that is kind of gone because of more of a casual environment. And I think like that is like a really, really good thing to be in a more casual environment. Because as we talked about earlier, like that disarms people. And if you are comfortable, you're going to play better. But then I think there's like sometimes a balance of, when to focus on things and when to have fun. And I really learned again from John, like, dude, don't sit in the corner and not say anything. It's weird. Have fun. We're here to have fun. Like, this is what this is all about. And I tell people that still to this day, like, if we're not having fun, like, what are we doing here? So these days, I think it's changed a lot because people maybe feel less precious about it. But honestly, like, no matter what we're doing, where we're doing it, it's all should be just as precious. And also, it should be fun. And it's not fun to sit in a corner and get yelled at. And also, it's maybe not so precious if we're all just laughing and like making silly jokes, and like we're not going to get that kind of focus that you're going to get on some magical guitar solo.
Yeah, there's a balance there. I think to kind of go back to thinking about these sort of stories that you would hear of studio culture from the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. In general, I think, better that that's changed and updated. And I think you're absolutely right in that, there's an effort to make things more casual now and less precious. Just this fact that studio time costs far less than it used to. Things are a lot more accessible. Things are a lot more easy to capture. But I think part of it is that we just have transparency too. That if you run things in a manner that people aren't enjoying, everyone will find out. Yeah. Because of internet, Absolutely. There's a look into all of that. So it's just, I think the transparency of things has also completely changed the industry, and probably for the better. Now, on the other side of it, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, because it is important for things to feel relaxed and supportive and just fun, but that can go too far, where then it's like, we need to get to work and we need to start making some decisions, or this isn't prepared enough. Like, you should have taken this more seriously before you walked in the door.
Yes.
Like when somebody shows up to Pachyderm not really ready and has high expectations for how this is going to turn out, and they're spending a bunch of money, I'm sure, and that sort of thing. And then you're going, what did you expect that you're not ready for this?
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people when they're coming in, record yourself on your iPhone, whatever it is. It doesn't matter how crappy it sounds, like just do it and play it back and send me a copy. And that helps me kind of get my head around, okay, what are we dealing with here? Rehearse with a click track, blasting through your PA if you have to, because it's good for everybody, not just the drummer. Like, preparation is like such key to making a record. And I feel pretty lucky where a majority of people that come in, they are prepared and they do their work and they take it very seriously, and they're spending, like you said, a lot of money to come. And so they're going to not waste it. Another thing, like, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, like, there's like a balance and kind of an internal like comfort level too with making people comfortable with like the engineering side of things. It's kind of like an airliner. If the pilot hit a bump, like every time he hit a bump, if he got on the PA and was like, like everyone would be super like uncomfortable in their seats. I'm sure that happens all the time. Or if you've ever landed in a blizzard or whatever, I'm sure those guys are just stressed to the max, but you never know it. And the same goes for me when I'm engineering and just making people comfortable in the space, especially in a large format studio like that. There's always something that happens. There's always a noise or a mic pre that is like 50 years old and needs to be coaxed into working again or whatever. But like the most important thing is just to make sure that you can handle that without, I mean, honestly, it's not like hiding anything from anybody, but it's like, this is just my zone and I don't want you to think about this. I want you to think about playing guitar, not about the weird noise you just heard in your headphones and things like that.
Honestly, I think that's one of the big advantages of working at a studio and not doing it on your own, is just having somebody else that can handle the tech, that can handle the process for you, so you can stay in one mind frame, which is creativity.
Yeah.
And thinking about your performance and thinking about the song and whatever, part of the process you're in at the time. That's such a relief sometimes to just have somebody else that can deal with the computer just crashed and something's not working today for some reason, but just hang tight. You keep thinking about that. We'll be back online in 2 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. Or you mean not even telling them that all this stuff happened.
Yeah.
And they, at the end of the day, and it's kind of a thankless job sometimes, but I'm happy to do it. Like at the end of the day, they had no idea the computer crashed.
Yeah.
And like you were like freaking out and sweating. And they're like, wow, man, great day. Wow, perfect day. And you're like, yeah, okay, thanks.
Right.
But that's also part of the job.
Yes, absolutely. What is something that you see over and over again, can be big, can be small, of, just something that people often overlook about getting ready with sessions at Pachyderm or elsewhere, from any of your experiences of just like common mistakes that you see?
I think a lot of times it's just, and it's maybe just humans in general, right? It's the insecurity of things. And I think a lot of people, like when they come in, if you can let go of that, you're going to have a great time. And I think when people just, and it's really hard to do that. I think when people can just know that they're here to create something, and if they just know that coming, and as corny as it sounds, coming in and doing your best is really all that matters, and not getting so hung up on like everything's got to be perfect. I got to do this in one take. It's just trusting the process, right?
Yeah.
And when people don't trust that process, then they're starting to get into the details, and then now they're not focusing on like what even the chords of the song are, and then they're messing up even more, and it's like this huge snowball effect.
Yeah.
But if you can just let go and trust everyone in your band and everyone in the room and the engineer and the producer, and sometimes it's like really hard to do, I feel like that's always the best recording experience.
I agree. And I don't know, I call it sort of like that first song dilemma, like the very first one you do is the hardest with a new producer engineer at a new studio, because you just don't have that trust built in yet. Even if you are trying to be once you get through one, that feels so much better, right? Because now you know what to expect for the output.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of people that are in that phase of doing their first recordings. And sometimes people are really good about listening and knowing when to hold their ground about a creative idea or take advice. They just naturally figure that out well, know when to question something or when to wait and see how it turns out. And other people aren't, and will, really impede the process because they're just worried. They're full of anxiety about how it turns out. And to be fair, I get it.
Yeah. And
so it is something that I often think about of like, how do we make this even better? How do you get through that easier? Because outside of that, I'm doing my best to communicate and to explain the process and to say, and to teach to some extent of saying, hey, that's not something we need to worry about yet. And one thing that I'll say if I sense that somebody is really anxious about the final product, because sometimes you just get something recorded and it's like somebody's nitpicking something that is like a mix problem and it's not mixed yet.
Right.
Or like there's certain things like that where it's just like you're just a little too far ahead. Just hang tight. We're going to get there. And I will take a second to educate on this is what you can expect now. This is what you can expect at the next stage and so on. But, sometimes that only goes so far. The first song dilemma for me is like, I just wish I could like put the client, like freeze them in time for a second and then like get their song done. And then like, this is what the end sounds like.
Yeah.
Cause that clears up so much stuff.
Absolutely. No. And I think too, like part of that whole first song dilemma is like when someone walks into your space, they should be like, that they're going to start to trust you more is just, what does it look like? Like, is your space like filled? Is it your bedroom? Like, or is your underwear there? Like, do you have like, like garbage everywhere? Is it clean? Because it should be clean, because that's number one. If someone walks into your space and it's put together, I mean, like this room, like everything's set up and it looks beautiful in here and it's awesome. Where if it was just like kind of like beer cans and stuff laying around, that's like a little red flag. And the less of those you can have, the quicker you're going to get somebody to trust you.
Yeah. And there's just fewer distractions then too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that are listening to this episode probably also do a fair amount of recording on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe debate like the pros and cons of using a bigger studio versus the ability to, save money and do stuff on your own. And part of it is just like, having somebody else take the pressure away. Obviously, there's really great rooms and there's, some technical advantages of just of gear and acoustics.
Sure.
But even if you ignored all of that, just having a place that is free of distractions and somebody else is actively working to eliminate those for you. And in the same vein of taking away distractions, Pachyderm has another layer, which is like it's removed. You have to travel there, you know? And you get out of the city, you often will stay there and spend a few days, a week, whatever it is. You get out of your regular routine versus I'm going to my friend's basement or I'm going to my own basement or my bedroom or whatever to do this, where there's a million other things that are waiting for me there too. Just regular life distractions.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the same goes for Pachyderm. The same goes for your bedroom, right? If you are recording in your bedroom and it's not an organized space, I'm a big believer in that our brains have a capacity for things, right? And every little thing that's a distraction is taking away from that capacity. And if we can remove all the easy things and even like get through some of the hard things, we're going to have more capacity to make better stuff. Where if we're staring at our desk in our bedroom and it's like filled with a week's worth of stuff, like there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the vertical plane effect is a real thing. Like if it's a clean vertical plane or horizontal plane effect, it's going to be filled with shit. But the less of that you have to look at, the less you're distracted and the more you can focus on writing a part or like playing this part just how you want it or singing about like whatever emotion that you're trying to, conjure up. And I think that goes down to like every little detail like that.
Yeah. It all adds up.
Mm-hmm.
For artists that are listening, thought about Pachyderm, they know about it, they'd love it's on their bucket list, they want to go, but they're not sure if they're ready. What are some tips that you can give people, or like when do you think people are ready to level up to a place like Pachyderm?
I mean, honestly, we cater to everyone.
Okay.
I do all kinds of different projects. That space just has some sort of magic to it. I've been to other studios around the country that kind of have that, and I don't know what it is, if it's like residual energy from records being done there, like legendary records or just good players or whatever. But when you come, whatever level you're at, like you definitely tap into that. That being said, like playing something 100 times definitely makes you better at playing it. And all of that is very important, that preparation and rehearsal. But I feel like these days, I mean, just everyone takes things pretty seriously. And like, I'm very grateful for the bands that come because they're always prepared. I just had this amazing big like jazz band come, and like they're all amazing players and they all went to music school and they're all great at what they do. But I know that they were rehearsing like 3 times a week for months, not taking it for granted, like your instrument or your part in the band. And really like it's, showing up, punching in, doing the work. That's super important. And it can be frustrating if you maybe don't feel like you're good at your instrument. But again, that's just like time and preparation. And that's how you get to those moments in the studio where things are magical and something happens on the first take is someone put in a lot of time.
Yeah.
It didn't come from nowhere.
Stylistically, production-wise, engineering-wise, and maybe this is just all over the place, but is there a tendency to do things more live tracked just because you have a large format studio and it's easier to do than, say, a smaller room? Or are you doing a lot of like 1-by-1 kind of tracking?
It's usually never 1-by-1 unless requested. I've done pop punk records where that's just kind of part of the aesthetic of things. But generally, everyone is together playing at the same time. I feel like a lot of records I've made over the last like 5 years, things are definitely swaying more towards that. There's nothing that can replace the sound of humans playing together in a room. And I tell people like that when they come in all the time that I want you to feel like you're at your practice space. I want you to feel like you're at a show and the lights are down. You know, whatever is the most comfortable place that you play music in, I want you to be in that same spot that you are in your practice space, like from where the drummer is and things like that. And so I generally set people up live. Sometimes we'll go back and we'll do like a guitar overdub again, or we'll like, I was singing and playing guitar at the same time. Can I just play guitar or can I just sing? Things like that. But even like if it's a scratch track, it's still, the sounds are not scratched. They are like what a finished sound would be on a record. And that is informing what the drummer is doing. And if it sounds like a really crappy guitar in the drummer's headphones, he's not going to play his best take. If everything sounds like a finished record in someone's headphones, like they're going to be inspired to do their best work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And we're lucky to have a room like that that's very easy to pull off those kinds of sessions. I know like some studios, it's hard because of space and rent and all of those like real world things get in the way of some of that. But I feel very lucky to be in a space that where you can do that and be in a room that, you know, everyone can be there together. Because I think my philosophy, that's the best way to make records.
What about some of the wild, like most memorable sessions for you?
I get asked this a lot, and there's like so many times. It's more about moments.
Sure.
I have never worked at a studio that has had so many moments that are like, whether it be a band playing a song the first time and that was it, or we were just recording a rehearsal of something and that is like the song that's on the record. I think there's just some sort of alchemy and magic in that valley. So there's several records. Haley Bonner's Feeling Strangely Fine, the I Can Change, I think was one take after dinner. There's always one take after dinner. And that's the communal aspect of things too. Eating dinner together, hanging out together, going for a hike in the valley, everyone kind of being of one mind really informs like how tight everyone plays together. And I never really knew that was a thing until working at Pachyderm. Even at Seedy, where we're all like living together, but we're in Los Angeles. So like someone's going to the Rainbow to like find Bret Michaels one night and we're not just like hanging out in the woods together.
Sure.
And yeah, so that Haley song, Jeffrey Folkalt is one, like probably I think he came right after Trampled by Turtles first time. I just happened to hit record on a rehearsal and it's a song called Oh Mama, and that's like the song on the record. Dave Simonette and Trampled by Turtles, Dave's solo stuff, Dead Man Winter, and there's definitely like one take things there. The Districts, like there's like vocals where you're like looking at the guy singing and you're like, oh my God, like that is it, right? I don't have to edit this. This isn't a comp, like that is it. And it's those times where people feel comfortable and disarmed and they're not anxious. And that's when your best stuff gets done. We just did a record last week, the jazz Leslie Vincent. I remember her piano player was like, this sounds like a finished vocal. And she's just doing a take. But those are those moments where people are so comfortable.
I love it. So we've talked about obviously practice as your preparation to getting, you know, really great sounds, reps, making your space feel as comfortable as possible, trusting the people around you, all of those things. Pretty obvious, but they're important to think about and make sure that you're doing what you can, that everybody's doing what they can to be as prepared and to set up a space to feel comfortable, taking the time to get the setup right, to get your headphones right, all of that stuff. Let's talk about the little things that people do in terms of studio etiquette where it's just ruining the vibe.
Well, I think it's a spectrum. And we kind of talked about it earlier where you have like one side of young assistant engineer Nick who doesn't talk for 10 hours and goes home to his girlfriend and can't stop talking.
Sure.
And then the other side where it's me, young assistant Nick, and I'm talking to the band while the engineer is trying to get sounds and I'm the one starting conversations. You know, it's a time and a place. You have to have fun, but also you need to be very aware of your surroundings. Like I always think in my head, and I never say this to anybody because I don't want to be mean, but it's funny, like engineers and producers and mixers, we have to listen to a lot of conversation in the background. And I don't think there's ever a time where someone holds the talkback down during a guitar take and just like talks to the person while they're playing. But that's the kind of stuff we have to, handle. And it's perfectly fine because it's part of hanging out and being comfortable with each other. But there's definitely a time to talk, a time to listen. And back to what I was saying about John, when everyone is listening to a vocal or a guitar take or a solo or whatever someone's doing in the performance area and everyone's like focused to that, I'm a firm believer that that person out there is receiving all of that and that's helping them like make a good take. But if every time I push the talk back, they're hearing someone tell, dad jokes in the background, that person may not like directly feel like, like someone's not listening to me, I feel bad, but something in the back of their head is like distracting them from what they're doing. Or every time you push the talk back, someone's laughing at a joke, that person's going to think you're laughing at them.
Right.
Part of them is going to be like, what did I just do?
I think it's about matching people's energy.
Yes.
Because, especially with bands, there can be multiple things happening. And if you're doing an overdub or only one person is a part of something and then the rest of the band is not doing that, they might be off having their own conversations and stuff. And it's just about like understanding what the energy is at what time. Because sometimes that jokiness of everything can help disarm people and everybody's having fun and everybody's laughing together. But if you can tell that somebody's nervous or really getting frustrated about something and working hard and then other people are not paying attention to that, that's where that friction can get worse.
Yeah.
And I think it is the job of the engineer and the producer to like be really aware of what the moment needs and trying to bring that, like either keep it or bring it. Because I've had times where, let's say I'm working with a singer, getting a vocal or whatever, and it's a grind. Like we have to work something out and we're getting into it. And if people feel impatient or there's some bad energy from the back of the room or something like that, then it's like, I need to somehow send these people out for dinner or whatever. So we can just not have that around for a while. But
like sending them out to dinner is a much nicer way than, hey, everyone shut the hell up.
Absolutely.
Things like that. And like a lot of times I say to people, like, can we all focus on what is going on out in the performance area and let's help that person like get this done. Yes. Something like that. Not like, and I mean, sure, inside sometimes I get super frustrated because it's really hard. But at the same time, I want people to have fun. Yeah. It's that spectrum.
The amount of times it's been like, this happens with vocals a lot where first take, we're kind of getting things going, right? We got sounds, but their singer's kind of getting warmed up still. And right away, the band is paying attention. They all care, whatever. And they're just like, all these suggestions, and I'm just like keeping talk back off. Like, you guys can tell me all you want, but I'll be the filter for what gets said to the singer because they don't need this yet. They probably are fully aware of the things that they want to do better on their next take without us saying anything.
Yeah.
So let's not. We'll filter this to them when we need to, but let's give them a chance to settle in.
I have a pile of notepads on the rack. And I give everyone a notepad. And I always have the Pro Tools clock up. And I don't ever want to shut down someone's creativity. And just like you're describing, like everyone's got all these ideas and they all want to just like say them out loud and like everyone's super excited. I'm just like, write it down. Like, and that keeps things quiet, but it also gets your idea down on paper. And then, as you just said too, like maybe that person on the third take does exactly what you wrote down. I don't know if that's because you were like sending it out to that person or if, as you just said too, they were going to do that anyway. But I'm a big believer in writing all of that stuff down, like one thing at a time, very organized and like very much taskmaster going through all those things. And then when we're all done, it's like, okay, does anyone have anything that we didn't do that they feel like we should address? And if everyone's done their work and like written down on the notepad or a timestamp at 1:10, you said this weird word and maybe you should like say this instead. That always makes like the best stuff because there should be no shutting down of ideas. No matter if like the drummer can't sing or whatever, like he still has some creative input to like or feeling as a listener like what someone's doing in the band.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think you just have to create a culture of like one team. We're all working together here.
Yeah.
But there's a process. There's a good way to do this, or an easy way to do this, I should say, and a harder way to do this.
For sure.
And that culture gets developed. It's through just good communication between people of understanding what's going to happen and what order, because there are different processes. There's different ways of recording things. I tend to do almost everything one at a time. We'll do some things where we track stuff together. I like the process of making stuff one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And just a different way of doing it. So,
yeah.
I
mean, that's the great thing about art and records and making music is there's like no right or wrong way.
No, exactly.
It's also sometimes the hardest thing is that there's so many possibilities and so many different ways.
Correct.
And, as you said earlier, you have to make a decision.
Yes.
At some point, you have to make a decision. Like there's so many classic records where someone decided like, well, that was it. And there's Led Zeppelin songs where John Bonham speeds up in the chorus. They didn't beat themselves up about that. That's just like the decision they came up with. Like that was the When the Levee Breaks chorus number 2 that we cut from the tape and put in there. It's a little faster, but maybe it feels better. Let's go with it. And they made the decision.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you're picking places and people where you trust their taste and you trust their creative direction, and that's part of your choice.
Yeah.
But to get back to the sort of the culture thing, I think that once you've sort of, picked your spot, you've got a process down and a way of doing it, I like to really encourage communication, but also kind of going back to teaching of like, but there is going to be a way that we're going to do this. So by all means, talk to me, bring out ideas and stuff like that. But I might just say, hold that thought for this moment. And eventually after you work that through, people start to see the logic of like, when should we really start digging into things and when we shouldn't. And I think just that comes by creating it, of like leading by example of this is how we're going to communicate to each other. We're always going to give people space to get into to their thing before we throw them with a bunch of critiques. But at some point we'll allow that discussion to come up, and then we'll probably be able to take some of those critiques out because they just naturally went away anyways.
Totally.
Just giving people space, trusting each other, trusting me to lead the way, that yes, you are going to be heard, but there has to be a way of which we do this.
For sure. Yeah, because you can't overload someone. No. And again, back to the talk back, like every time you push that button and the control room is like got 8 people talking in it, that is overloading someone's brain. Like whether they've like recognize that it is or not, it totally is. And the same goes with ideas. Like you're never going to make a decision if you have 15 ideas flying out all at once. Hold that thought, or I say write it down, or same difference, right? Just like don't forget what you just said. What you just said is super important, but right now you need to like just wait until the right moment, and when that person is ready to receive your idea, like we're going to go there.
Yeah, totally. Well, Nick, this has been a fantastic conversation. I probably only have a few other things before we wrap this up, but the first is like, what's on the horizon? What's next for Pachyderm?
We are coming off of our best year ever and expanding out a little bit. We have a second room that we've been opening up for some of, kind of started out as bigger clients that have multiple engineers on a project. And now I think I'm going to kind of open it up for maybe more people to come down and vibe and songwrite a little bit more. I have someone in there right now doing that. But really, I guess we're just kind of continuing to do what we've been doing for the last decade and always trying to get better at doing that. And part of that is just continuing John's legacy.
I love it. One thing I ask all people that come on the podcast is if they want to pass along a secret. And basically, I've always phrased it as something that you, maybe your younger self, would have liked to have heard, or just a tip that you keep coming back to, maybe a lesson that you've sort of had to learn the hard way, or anything that you want to pass along to the scene.
If I were to tell my younger self, and I tell myself my older self all the time, is the most important thing is just showing up every day. Whatever happened yesterday, whether it be good or bad, just show up today and do your best work. And again, it may sound corny, but whatever that job is, it could be like a big Grammy winning client, or it could be, someone that's just kind of coming up. Like either way, you need to come and do your best work and only focus on that. It's really hard. I still struggle with it every day, but if you're focusing on what's in front of you, like the chances of getting tripped up and, anything like that are a lot lower. And it's that tennis match analogy. Like if you miss a point and you're just focused on missing that point, you're going to miss like the next 10, but if you miss a point, like those guys that win Wimbledon, that I'm sure that's a huge stage, right? They're bam, right back to it. Like every time. So
yeah, got to stay present.
Yeah. But showing up every day. I mean, that's something I wish my younger self would have said to himself.
Nick, if people want to reach out to you for more information or to Pachyderm, where do you send people?
You can hit up our website, Instagram as well. All our contact info is on there. info@pachyderm-studios.com. Email's great. You can even call the landline. We still got a landline down there.
There you go. We'll put at least some of that information in the show notes. Thank you again for doing this.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure to have you. To everybody that tuned in, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Definitely, if you have been thinking about a session at Pachyderm, maybe you want to check it out, definitely do it. I think it's such a cool place. I'd love to see it around for another 10 years and more. And just know that you're in good hands with Nick, and it's never too late. It's never too late. It's never too early. There's a lot of great studios in town. Don't feel intimidated. A lot of people here that work at these places really care.
Yeah.
And you can make some great tunes. But if you're doing it yourself too, hey, that's fun. You can always hire a studio for mixing and other things like that too. I know we do a lot of that sort of thing where people do their tracking on their own.
Yeah. Just keep making stuff.
Just keep making stuff. Absolutely. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time.